Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Danny Lichtenfeld, Director of the Brattleboro Museum. It's my pleasure to be your host for tonight's conversation between Curator Mara Williams and many of the artists, all but one of the artists featured in the exhibit, All Flowers Keep the Light. We expect to begin holding in-person events again soon, maybe within the next month or two. But I have to say, being able to have conversations like this one with a group of artists who are scattered all along the Eastern Seaboard, and you in the audience located who knows where, has actually been a real wonderful silver lining of the pandemic. And yet, that said, I know that many of you are ready to be done with Zoom, so I'm grateful that you've nonetheless chosen to join us this evening. In just a moment, I'm going to ask Mara to join me on screen. And then, if all goes well, Mara will be joined in succession for a series of brief chats with most of the artists featured in the exhibit, All Flowers Keep the Light. And while they're speaking, I'm going to be showing you their work, mainly by screen sharing the virtual tour of the exhibit, but we also have some videos and things to share. After Mara has spoken briefly with each of the artists, we're going to ask them all to come back on screen together to respond to questions and comments they might have for each other, and also questions or comments that you in the audience would like to ask. And so if you would like to join the conversation, what you should do is please type your questions or comments in the Q&A box if you're here on Zoom, which is different than the chat box. It's a little easier for me to keep track of if you put your questions and comments in the Q&A box rather than the chat box. And if you're watching on Facebook Live, you can just type your comments in there and we'll be monitoring that too. You should feel free to type in your questions or comments at any time, but we're going to wait until the end to get to all of them at once rather than do Q&A as we go. Excuse me. I think that's all the housekeeping I need to do. And so I'd like to ask my dear friend and colleague, Mara Williams, Chief Curator of the Brattleboro Museum and Arts Center, to turn on her camera and mic and join me on screen.
Hi, here. I can see myself, so I must be here. Hi, Danny.
So far, so good. And so, Mara, I'm going to turn it over to you here, and you just take it away, and I'll be doing the screen sharing, and so you just direct me as needed with the screen sharing.
Well, for everybody out there in Zoom and Facebook land, this is the first webinar I've done. So somehow the rest of the staff is all very expert at everything, and I'm the Luddite in the group. The one program I have done, we were actually recorded in the same room, and that went out, which was more what I'm used to doing. So the tech on this is in Danny's hands, and the brilliance on this will be in the hands of all of our wonderful artists. So the first group of artists I would like to invite to turn on their cameras are John, Robin, and Matan. And while they're coming on, and right before their piece is cued on this wonderful 3D series of images that we have that Danny is bringing us around the room. The piece in our show, All Flowers Keep Their Light, that is a collaboration by these three artists, photographer, poet, and musician, is really, it is a requiem. It's called Requiem, but it was put in the show because my idea of how flowers are imbued with meaning from a giver to a receiver in times of mourning and stress really are also about public monuments to mourning. And in this piece, which is dedicated to the 23 people who lost their lives in El Paso and the dozens that were injured, beyond that, and the families who lost that, began its genesis with John Willis taking photographs of the mounds of floral tributes that were left in El Paso. So John, I'm going to ask you to start the process of talking about your piece.
Well, thank you, Mara and Danny, and really want to just thank everybody at the museum for giving us the opportunity to be in the exhibit with all these artists. And I'm going to try really briefly to give an introduction. So in 2019 in August, my wife and I had gone down to the border for a week to meander back and forth along the Mexico, the United States border to just get a sense about the way that we felt about the border and the Latino and American Tex-Mex and everything combination during all the political divisiveness that we were hearing all the time. And while we came near El Paso, the shooting happened, and we just felt driven to go and you know, sort of, I don't know, acknowledge the horrors of what had happened and just stop in. And what we found was this amazingly beautiful community. El Paso is 85% Latino, and people were just incredibly wonderful. And I tried to make pictures to capture what I was seeing there. And that's the way I do things. I never thought I would use them though. And then I photographed instead of once, it kept coming back for a period of 4 days. And over that time, I ended up making a lot of pictures that I never thought I would use, but I was trying to understand my place there. And I'm not used to making pictures where I'm not getting to know people well. And I didn't know any of the people. And I just came back with the pictures and ended up making 23 photographs that I decided to use, one for each, to honor each person. And I shared them with Matan, who's a wonderful composer and musician that we had done a collaboration before. And he wanted to make music to go with each piece. And then later Robin came in. So I'm just gonna let Matan jump in.
Thanks, John. And thank you everybody for this event. It's really wonderful to be here. So when John approached me, he showed me the photos he took, and I was struck by just the density of the imagery. And it occurred to me that it had a kind of allegorical connection to this feeling that I've had a long time of the inability to process just the shootings as a phenomenon, the inability to actually mourn any individual, that everything was happening far away from me. And I wasn't able to process properly the tragedy that was going on there. And so the music reflects that in two ways. There are 22 very short pieces that I've written for the Marlboro Slipstream group, which was then ensemble in residence at Marlboro College. I should mention their names because some of the pieces are directed improvisations or partly written, and they had a very crucial impact on how the music ended up sounding. So that's Ned Rothenberg, Andrew Greenwald, and Jake Charkey. And so there are 22 very short requiems, and they're all playing at the same time at very low volume. And the group then plays each one in turn. Each of the pieces is only for a part of the group. And so in this way, I thought I reflected John's really powerful images, in that there is a constant barrage of information, and it really does take work to concentrate on any one incident. And I should mention that the piece as a kind of, the work is kind of like a network of pieces. And each one has I think, a interestingly different effect. The third and crucial addition to the piece was Robin's, who came in, who was kind of introduced to us through George Thompson, who wanted to do a book based on the images and music, that is meant to be read with the music in the background. And I will let Robin take the rest of the narrative. Thanks.
Thank you both, and thanks to Mara and Danny and the museum for including our piece. We're deeply honored to be part of this, and it seems more than auspicious that we were building this piece based on flowers at the same time others were doing so. Just a kind of meant to be feeling about it. I came into the project after John had taken the photographs and after Matan had written the music, meeting through a mutual acquaintance. And so I started to think about what could writing do to add to this in some meaningful way. And I began to do research about mass shootings in this country and about the El Paso mass shooting in particular. And I met with John and Matan early on. I flew up to where they lived and met with them. And we had a great weekend talking about what this might be. And we decided that we were going to continue to emphasize sort of an unrelentingly elegiac tone in this piece. The idea is to sort of slow time down and make the viewer be invited to be in the story of this. Whereas in our regular lives, oh, you'd flip a page of the newspaper, another mass shooting, another mass shooting. And we wanted this to have a kind of sustained attention to this horrific problem. And so I looked at the images, at least on my computer screen, of the photographs while listening to Matan's music the whole time I was researching in this and writing it to sort of immerse myself in it. And what I decided to do with the writing was to use it to tell the story literally. There's some just basic narrative parts in here. Also to convey some facts and some data about gun violence in America and the history of laws about weapons in America. But I wanted to do it all in a kind of lyric way that poetry can do. So it has sort of a lot of images and chant-like structure sometimes, and some surreal images and things that sort of arose out of my immersion in their art. And the other thing I did was to think about where the writing would be upon the page that would sort of go with the other art forms. And finally, then when we made it into a PowerPoint and then finally into this film, I learned for the first time how to sort of make the text move, to have animated text that would enter and leave in concert with the other two art forms. And so that is what we have here.
Okay, so now we'd like to show about a 2-minute clip so that people can really feel the piece in its entirety.
What's the technical glitch?
Video seems to have frozen.
Okay, so I think we have a technical glitch because the text is broken down on my.
Yeah, it's.
So I would like to say to our audience out there, it's very odd not to be looking at an audience so that I get some feedback as to what you might be questioning. That I have seen this piece in other iterations, that it has been, had a life other than the presentation that we're doing, that there are these beautiful prints, that there's a book that goes with it, that other institutions have installed the prints with mini microphones so that as you move past each print, the micro requiems are moving with you, and then the poetry is presented in other ways. So if any of my colleagues out there in the visual and performing arts world are looking, for a multimedia project that is incredibly beautiful and incredibly poignant and incredibly timely for this moment in America, that you might contact me and I'll put you in touch with these or any of the other artists in the show. I'm going to move on and ask these three wonderful artists to mute, and we'll be back with questions afterwards. And we're going to move on to Colleen Kiley now. And here's Miss Colleen coming to you from Boston. And everyone should know that Colleen was actually the genesis of this show. I have done other exhibitions on flowers and the role flowers play in cultures across time, and symbols of beauty and renewal. And I've lightly touched on the idea that they're tributes of condolence and remembrance, and the power that condolence and remembrance plays in the lives of individuals across the world. But it wasn't until I was visiting, can't hear me, okay.
Oh, now you're okay, now you're okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I lost you.
Let me put my volume back up again. I thought that was, okay, how's that out there in the world? Is anyone
Great.
else? Okay. So I have done other exhibitions on flowers, but it had been in my mind, you know, flowers specifically about mourning, or specifically about how flowers help us heal, was an idea. And then I saw Colleen's drawings, and they're on big, large, beautiful pieces of paper, and they're in ink and charcoal and hints of gouache in them, beautiful mark making throughout. And these were done in tribute to her mother, the floral tributes from her mother's funeral. And it just so happened that I had lost a brother and my mother was starting to fail. So it became very poignant for me to see these beautiful, beautiful pieces that Colleen did as a tribute to her mother, based on the gifts that Colleen and her family were given by individuals. So Colleen, I'd like you to talk about your mom and bringing tributes back to your studio and the process of making this work.
Sure, thank you. And thank you also, Danny, for doing this evening's event. I actually didn't know, Maura, that my work was the genesis of this, so I really appreciate you mentioning that. That means a lot to me. So I had never drawn flowers before. this body of work, you know, besides the odd one in my notebooks. And my mom died at the end of 2011, and I kept a few of her floral arrangements, not knowing why I was keeping them really, or what I would do with them, if anything, and ended up bringing to my studio. And I was on sabbatical that spring. And when I returned to my studio, I was jumping back into the work I had left before she died, but it just didn't, it wasn't connecting with me anymore. And, you know, as things go, I started experimenting with various things in the studio, and out of sheer frustration, one day I started drawing the flowers. And the initial phase of it was really experimenting with media and materials until I felt I had the right combination to draw these. I knew I wanted to do them large scale. They're on 32 by 40 inch pieces of museum board. They're liquid gesso, liquid graphite, and marker. It's kind of an odd combination of materials, but it worked out nicely. And I guess the important thing to know is that none of the images that I ended up drawing actually exist. Meaning what I ended up doing is I took bits and pieces of the three arrangements that I had, and I would build each image from bits and pieces of the others. And then I would invent other passages and mark making. You know, it became a very exploratory kind of drawing process. And I heard John mention earlier, he talked about the density of images, and I was thinking about that phrase because these images have a lot of air in them, but the marks are tremendously layered and transparent as well. I drew these over time. I guess it was about a 3-4 month period that I did the whole cycle. And I had decided when I first started the series that I would cap it and close it at 20. It seemed to be an appropriate number for this period of time immediately following my mom's death. And as it happened, she did love flowers. But that wasn't top of mind for me. It was really it was an immersion in drawing, which I always go back to when I find myself in in certain moments that I feel I'm searching for something in my work and I don't know what that is. So.
Yes, you came to me as a painter when I first met you.
Yeah.
And we worked on a group show, and they were big, luscious paintings. And then the other work I've seen of yours has been paintings.
Mm-hmm.
So I was very surprised at the breadth in these, but they're that wonderful combination of delicate and robust at the same moment. And so the density of your mark making, but the delicacy of the washes and the fluidity of your line. So it's a very successful suite of drawings, and I'm hoping people will get in the next week to see if you haven't seen these exhibitions yet. You still have about a week to see them before everything goes bye-bye again. But it's a remarkable suite that is a sustained suite of drawings, and yet everyone is different and has different nuances. So congratulations on that. Thank you,
Mara. Can I mention one more thing quickly? So when I conceived of these drawings and started doing them, it was from my intention from the beginning that I wanted to show them as a cycle. And I have to credit Mara because finally this is happening. And I held on to these drawings for 9 years, hoping that I would have this opportunity to show them in a group like this. So it means a lot to me. Thank you so much. You're most welcome. And we'll come back for questions and answers if anyone has any for Colleen. Just keep writing to Danny as we go along, and we'll get back with the whole group afterwards. And so now I'm going to ask Colleen to disappear and Cathy to magically appear.
And Mara, this is Danny. If I could just interject, are you all seeing my screen as I share it? Like you're seeing Colleen's drawings on the wall right now?
Yeah, right now. And now you're flipping this wonderful 3D so that people can feel like they're in the museum. And then it was wonderful. You're deeply going into individual pieces deeply.
I just wanted to make sure that was working. And so Cathy and Mara, if there are any, I'll just sort of click around and show some details as you're speaking. If there's anything in particular you want me to highlight, please just let me know.
Okay, so to the audience, you should know that this idea for the show is many years old. It was sort of a long time in the making, and then I put it on the boards, and it was scheduled, and it was supposed to open early in the pandemic. And then it didn't open early in the pandemic. And so I just sat on it. All the 5 artists in the show, of the original show, just said, sure, roll us down, put us wherever you need to put us. And in the meantime, during the pandemic, I started looking at Instagram. This is my new, I'm not going to be a Luddite anymore. I'm going to get with the program. And I saw that my friend Cathy Osman was, and I said, oh, good, I'll look at Cathy Osman's. And while I was away last summer, all by my lonesome, as we all were last year, all of a sudden, this glorious image of lilies started showing up on her Instagram feed. And Cathy posed the question, is it possible, is it appropriate to make an object of beauty during this mess that we find ourselves in. And this series became her attempt to answer that question. So Cathy, why don't you tell us what was on your mind, but also you're such an incredible printmaker, the process that you go through and the multi-layering. I'd like you to speak a little bit about your process at the same time.
I guess I'll go back to March, where we all were so riveted and terrified on multiple levels, the pandemic, the political scene. There seemed to just be this darkness, you know, and fear of the future. And so being a gardener, being someone who always harkens to spring, I thought, you know, how can I sort of relieve my, not relieve isn't the right word, but just redirect, I guess, my thinking. And so I did return to that which gives me sustenance, which is flowers. And so I started to draw, and full disclosure, I haven't used photographic images, but I didn't have lilies. So I did use photographic images and etched them in very informal ways on plastic plates, and started this series where I really embraced my own notion of beauty, being an abstract painter and someone who dances the dance, you know, of formal abstraction against those notions of beauty and something that might be decorative. And so I just said, whatever, you know, I'm just going to make images, and on a small scale, at a very small press, that I can revolve within. And it was surprising to me how my own feedback loop was a positive thing, but it was also it was sort of like turning pages, right? I had no sense of the necessity to please anyone, no necessity to do anything other than maintain my own equilibrium in the studio. And so I continue to use that equilibrium, amazingly. I'm still churning along in the studio, and they've evolved from flowers to body images to more complex structures that are more resonant to my earlier work. But it was and is a means, and continues to be a means for me, of having a heavily process-based craft, if you will, that it's the work of it, I guess. And I think every artist would talk about the work, you know, the manual work, the, you know, whittling the stick or something. But this process is very much about whittling a stick and not being sure of what the final image will be, but knowing that I can reiterate or redo or recycle and find some new forms for the work. So yeah, I guess.
So in these pieces, you developed a number of plates, and you run multiple times through with, you know, the plate that might have a rib cage against a poppy or a lily, and then you're playing with color. You know, about how many times does your average plate go through this press? Because there's an incredibly layered imagery and an incredible sense of multiple touches as you're going through the work.
Probably, you know, each image might have 8 to 10 passes through the press, but some of them, or many of them, now have collage elements. So the first, you know, layer or the fifth layer may be embedded in the original piece of paper, but then I make collage. I'm able to, you know, have these really fine rice papers that I can X-Acto knife an image and layer it on, so it feels seamless. So I am relying upon the monoprint process. Like this one has rice thrown on it to get those white spots. So I'm pretty inventive, bring the kitchen to the studio. I joke, you know, if a classic printmaker came in my studio, they'd be horrified because there's just ink everywhere and splotches and piles of rags and cardboard plates and onion, you know, wrapping plastic. And so I'm kind of a sculptor working two-dimensionally.
Well, they're just luscious images. And what's interesting to me is you're a sculptor, or you're sculpting an image, and there are all these layers, but they're so compressed, and yet they still feel fulsome. Yes, they're really masterful pieces.
Well, thank you.
So
I think that, it relates to, my painting process. So it's not dissimilar from how I've worked, as a painter of layering and a subtractive, additive process, but I'm able to somehow maintain that on the sheet of paper through this monoprint process. So yeah, lucky me that, archival paper is tough stuff.
It's not like cigar wrapper boxes of the early.
Right. Or Matt, the genius of Matt Medium, right?
That's right. Well, thank you. And we'll be coming back as a group at the end. And at this point, we're moving up onto the stage area with the only sculptor in the show, Miles Chapin, if you would come on. Thank you, Cathy. And Miles is the other person I added to the show once the pandemic started. Miles and I had been in discussions about a piece for the stage, not quite knowing when we were going to do it or what it was going to be or how it was going to relate, but knowing that the stage, I always like to have some really big showy thing on the stage. So, and when you're doing two-dimensional and video time-based work in the rest of the gallery, there's sort of a void up there. And I'm like, oh, a sculptor. I wonder if Miles has anything in his inventory that relates to flowers. And lo and behold, he said, I don't, but I will create a piece for you. I've been thinking about how to make an energy pulse of flower to get us out of this pandemic with hope. And so he's got this monumental piece that towers over me. And Miles, your process is incredible. Open and closed, weaving out of a solid block. So would you tell us about this piece in particular and how you sort of release this form in a subtractive way from a block of granite?
Yeah, thank you so much, Mara, and thank you, Danny, and thanks to the artists being here and the everyone here. This is great. Yeah, like you said it so well. You had pitched this show to me, and so I started sketching kind of every morning, just kind of doodling ideas, and kind of came up with this basic image in 2D, just a very basic line drawing, and then made an wire armature, just a small little maquette, and then I ordered a big slab of this very fancy Paradiso granite, and really directly carved from there. And the way I had to be able to juxtapose the polished with the split, if you can pan down to the kind of lower part of this piece, Danny, you can see that this split texture on the piece, I had to remove all in one piece. And so I had to do that pretty much at the end. To be able to pull it away, I had to carve the bottom of those polished forms. So I had to really have it very delicate and then split away that material. So it's really a piece of fragility, kind of blooming up through that broken stone, the split stone. And so, like I said, I really directly carved it, and just kind of following that feeling of this, powerful force coming up through and symbolizing hope. So,
well, I'd like to ask you a question, whether this was sort of deliberate or it's just my reading, because it reads both as an energy pulse and a bloom, which is its title. But if you look at the small of the back and the hip here and on the front, it is such a woman's body to me. I mean, it's just so beautifully a woman's body, smooth on one side, rough on the other. And was that just a a natural curve that you put in the back, or did you actually plan that to look like a woman's body?
No, yeah, I often find that pieces feel very human to me, and I really like to work that in. And that section was really difficult for me to navigate. Coming from the split form to the polished form, having all these facets kind of line up together. And so I did one side and it kind of, so it's a little bit of both. I like to have the kind of smooth curves, and it really did turn into hips, like you say. So just kind of finding that form.
I don't know if you can spin that so that you're coming in at the side so people can see that the bands actually wrap away from each other, so that you could actually slide your hands in very different directions. And I'm not sure how you get a tool in there that actually pares away stone. This is the alchemy of art, and this is one of the ones that just it's amazing to me.
So there's probably, I don't even want to guesstimate how many hours, but a tremendous amount of time in those nooks and crannies. You have to drill it out and then carefully chisel it out as to not break it. So it's a very long, kind of slow, methodical process to be able to smooth. And then anything inside that's polished was all hand polished, which for granite takes a very long time to get nice and smooth.
Well, it's a masterful piece, and it's so robust and bursting with energy, and yet there is that, it is monumental. It's larger than a woman's body would be, or a flower would be, obviously, but there's this wonderful play of energy and power, and then delicacy and magic in the piece. So again, anyone who hasn't come to see it, this is your chance.
Thank you so much. Yeah. And another big consideration, I knew that amazing skylight was there. And so being able to play with opening that up from the top so that the light can come down through. And then that white texture is all bushing hammered. So taking a point and repeating, with an air tool, and then other places by hand where the air tool won't get to. Or just to give a little more texture, so that texture kind of shows as the light comes down through, was a big thing.
So the other question I have is, down at the base, there are these indents that go like this, right? Mm-hmm. Is that a product of the stone coming from the quarry, or is that a product of you splitting the stone, or is that an embellishment just to get that edge the way you wanted it?
No, that is me. I split each one of those pieces out to kind of mimic that V that's coming down from the base. Coming down from the sculpture mimics in the base. So I did a scoop split of just carving. If you can zoom, I don't know how much we can zoom in, but you can see the tool marks both at the bottom of the piece. You can see the tool marks here. Yep. Where I did that split. And then you could also see the tool marks on the side where the scoops happened. And so that is all with hand forged tools, carving, and it's a carved split instead of a feathered and wedge split. Not to get too technical, but very intentional. And I felt like it was really fitting to add that aspect to the piece. It's really about what has been taken away. And I felt like that was a really poetic and interesting aspect. And especially with the splits on the actual sculpture, I wasn't sure, at when I was doing them, like I said from the beginning, that it was already really delicate, and you never really know what's going to happen with the split. It's you have some control, but you really have to let go, and the stone kind of does what it wants to some degree. So I was imagining it in pieces and having to display it as such, but
Well, that didn't happen, and I'm very grateful, and that you and your team and our wonderful Sarah and Tim managed to get it in safely into that spot.
Yeah, that was, yeah. Thank you so much.
Great. Well, thank you, Miles, and you stay tuned for coming back. And now I'd like to invite Claire.
Hi.
Hi, Claire. So
Hi.
Claire's my new discovery. That everyone should know that the artists in this show, some of them I've worked with multiple times in 30 years. And Claire was my big discovery for this show. I was continuing to look for work I didn't know that somehow added to the conversation that artwork has with each other. And unbelievably, I found her in a magazine on the city of Baltimore, you might ask, but I do have a relative in Baltimore. So here I have the city of Baltimore, and I found Clare Elliott. And you just tell us about Miss and her place in the history of dance, plus the community of dancers who have studied with her, and then how you had this collaborative process with your fellow dancers to realize this piece.
Sure. So thank you for finding me, Mara. It's a great opportunity for me. And I've been up a few times now, so appreciate being in Vermont for the first time. And you said this show has been a long time in the making, in a couple of years. And I think that's really something that's for me to focus on, because if it's been a few years, you might not know me, we might not be here because she might still be alive. Right. And I think that is a really hard hitting thing for me, and something that was very different for me for this, because the intention was never to take it somewhere else. Each one of the ladies in the pieces own it. They paid for the supplies, and I had to go around collecting it all back from them. So it really is a journey in not only in its original conception, but something else for this. So I think my artwork. So I'm originally a creative writer, and so none of this has text in it, but a lot of my collage work has text in it. And I think my work ultimately becomes a conversation about who I am and who they are, because I'm a white woman and they're Black women. And a conversation not just about the pieces, but about our relationship. And so I started making collage back in 2012, really because I have a friend who also does collage, and then it became a therapeutic thing. So Cathy talked about the cutting and the pasting and the work of it. I have anxiety, I have panic attacks, and I just over-process information. So it became that. I was baptized when I was 19 years old. Don't ask me why. I'm not particularly religious, but I am spiritual. And my godmother, Lori, she was a dance instructor at a Baltimore City high school where I went to an all-girls school. So she was active as a teacher for, I guess, 20 years, but in the Baltimore dance community for longer than that. And I was the manager of the dance team, which is fitting for my personality and my job now as a corporate fundraiser. But we continued on after some of the girls graduated, and doing an alum show every year that was a fundraiser for our current students. So there's well over 100 women that range. I think the oldest is 47 now. My godmother started teaching early in her 30s, late 20s, or coaching. So this really came about 4 years ago, after she passed away from complications of lupus. She lived with lupus for a very long time, and in 2017, the effects of lupus on her body really just took a toll, and she passed away. I had been invited to participate in another show at a center called the UB Blake National Jazz and Cultural Center. I always mess up that name, where I had been working with collage flowers anyway. I generally get an idea and I do a bunch of pieces around it. So I had been scanning real flowers and then collaging them onto other pieces with gold leaf and silver leaf and some other things. And then she unexpectedly passed, because she was just one of these women where you were like, she'll be fine. She'll be fine. And she wasn't fine. You know, I think it's I can pinpoint what shock feels like because it shocked me to my core. So then it became about, do I still want to do the show? Do I have enough energy? Do I have, you know, enough emotional capacity? And her good friend was the executive director of the center and actually really helped me start showing artwork all the way back 10 years ago. And he's like, you need to do it. You know what she would say, you know? So then I just reached out to the girls as, you know, a part of their journey as well, if they wanted to be a part of it. A lot of them were in artwork that I already had. And my artwork always has a form of community piece to it, whether it's another artist that's, you know, with me doing performance art. The girls have danced at a show that I've done before. And a lot of them were like, yeah. And, you know, I think the overall piece really, not only individually looks at them, but as a collective, that is the emphasis of the group. This is what it feels like. Like, I miss not being around them. I miss not being in their space when they're not around. And certainly I miss hers, you know, being in her space. So I met individually with the girls. It was very challenging. I spent a lot of time in my Reservoir Hill, if anybody's been to Baltimore, apartment in the basement, crying, cutting out flowers, gluing things, watching the girls cry. And then we had the show in July, and I think it was really cathartic because she really impacted a lot of people's lives, not just mine. And if any of you were at the opening, you know, I brought Janae up, who's in one of these pieces, and I really wanted to do that because I think it is just as much their work, not just because she meant something to them in their own unique ways, but because it's their image. It's, you know, I'm a white woman, you know, putting images of Black women, you know, on art pieces. And that's always been a conversation that I've had to grow into because I grew up in a multicultural environment. And so I think it's really important for me to acknowledge that each of them contribute to this. Each of them contribute, not just because with their image, but the impact that they've had on me, and their relationship with her. So her siblings are in this. Two of them, I don't know how to direct this,
That's
but
okay. That's okay. You know, it is a multi-generational piece for the audience who hasn't seen it. If you come in, the women are of a variety of ages. There are a variety of body types. It's really a celebration of womanhood, and particularly Black womanhood. And I think that Claire has captured that powerfully. So we will be back to Claire and everyone else with questions, but right now I'm going to skip over to Amy.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello, Mara, and everybody out there.
So many of you in the audience who come to museum shows regularly will absolutely remember the first piece of Amy's that I showed, which was a sculpture of a bathtub with a video of a woman. It was 9 minutes long, and it was the 9 months of pregnancy, and it was a self-portrait. So that was the beginning of my relationship with Amy, started with life. And then another project which premiered at the Museum of Modern Art was her first feature-length film. So not a video piece, but a feature-length film. It was a documentary on called Instructions on Parting. And Amy did that when she lost her sister, her mom, and her brother in a very short period of time. And that is a show that a film that we showed at the Latches with a discussion with hospice. So the life and death flow, Amy has worked into her artwork for a period of over 20 years now. And this piece is the least descriptive and the most open-ended evocation of life and death. So why don't we show it? It is a silent film. It is a 2-channel film where the images come together. And Amy, you can tell us how you decided to put these images together and the pacing of the images.
Absolutely. And thank you, Mara. It's been such a pleasure knowing you and knowing the museum and feeling just the support of the local community and also just, you know, the broader community of artists in Vermont. I live in New Hampshire. And this piece honestly has been a return for me to a number of things that I love and just kind of putting them all together. I love gardening. I love photography. My master's degree is in photography, and it's kind of the base of all of my work. And I love film. And as Mara was saying, you know, I've had these different iterations of my career, and some of them have to do with video installation and sculpture. And then I moved into film, and this really has been a powerful way of bringing me back to the essentials that I love. And it really started with kind of an accidental experiment where I had this tulip plant, not the one you're seeing here, but a different tulip plant in my studio. And I started documenting it through time lapse. And when the tulip looked like it was completely dead, I continued to document it. And when I put all those still images together to essentially make an animation, I realized that the stem, long after all the petals were gone, continued to just twirl and track the sunlight. And it was such a gorgeous image of something that to kind of the casual observer would think represented death. And it was really still full of vitality. And so it gave me this idea to essentially do a durational artwork that if you look at it from its very basic beginning to its ultimate end, took me probably 9 months. And it started with selecting the bulbs, which is almost like selecting a paint color, or maybe in a performance, like selecting your actors, and then potting them up, putting the pot in my basement, waiting like 4 months over the winter, and then bringing it to my studio. And then I photographed it through automation every 6 seconds, 24 hours a day for 36 days. In the midst of that, I actually had a residency at Vermont Studio Center. So I brought the whole thing with me. I, you know, missed a few hours in there and I was like, uh-oh, you know, but I photographed it throughout the residency and then brought it back with me to New Hampshire. And it was a conglomeration essentially of over 200,000 still images to make this film. And the idea behind it really is this notion of samsara, which is a Buddhist concept of birth and death and rebirth. And so the film itself lasts 5 minutes, but it's on a continual loop. And so when the right-hand channel, when the left-hand channel starts, it's from the initial blooms, it goes through its process all the way to death, and then loops and starts over from death to birth. And the right-hand channel does the same thing. We're having a little glitchy here. So if you experience it in person, it will be a little smoother, but that's okay. This is just the internet, you know. The right-hand channel starts from death and is in reverse and goes to birth. There's just 1 second in the middle when the two channels are identical. And it's, you know, this continual cycle of birth and death that loops perpetually, that is something that I seem to keep coming back to over and over in my artwork. As Mara mentioned, you know, it's a theme that I've revisited in multiple forms.
Well, thank you. Now there is one other artist in the show. Her name is Anna Schuleit Haber, and we did a program with her on the Friday of Memorial Day, so it was May 28th. And this is the piece is called Bloom, titled the same thing that Miles titled his, and it's a documentary of a project she did in Boston with 38,000 potted plants and sod placed in a mental health facility. And why aren't there flowers in mental health facilities? And calling attention to the lives that have been lived in this particular mental health facility, but you can abstract from that. And that interview is on our website, as are all these incredible programs that Danny has produced over the course of the past year. And I encourage people to go and see that. But in the meantime, I am going to ask Danny to bring up, well, I'm going to ask all my colleagues to bring on your video and your audio. And to Danny also bring on his video and audio, because he has the Q&A. If there is anything in the Q&A, Danny, and if not, I thought we would give each of the artists a chance to speak with the other artists. Colleen has not come back. Not seeing Colleen.
Colleen's not back yet, and Matan is not back. So first, let me thank you all and apologize for the technical glitches. I'm sharing my screen from home, and like much of Vermont, I have a really spotty internet connection, and so I apologize, especially for those of you whose work is video. We can try again maybe after we have a little further conversation, see if that works better. But it might just need to be that people need to get themselves to the museum to experience the videos properly. We can also share. I'll see if I can share in the chat for our audience if the videos are somewhere publicly available online where they can access them that way. So thank you all for your patience with that. And yeah, and so let me take this moment to encourage our online audience to, now would be the time, if you have questions or comments for any of these artists, or for Mara, or for me, please type them into the Q&A box. And I will also look over on Facebook and see if there are questions coming in there. And we love it if you would like to join the conversation.
Oh, good.
And
Robin?
thank you, Robin is sharing a link that I'll share with the audience as well. And here's a note coming into the chat for Claire from Linda, saying, "So proud of you, Clare Elliott. I am so proud of you. Lori is smiling down on you from heaven."
Okay, great. Great. Well, I'm sure there are mothers and 23 angels smiling down. So I'm not sure where Colleen is. But at any rate, do any of the panelists have, you've all experienced the show at this point. Do you have any questions for each other about process or intention? Okay, Cathy.
I have a question for Robin, Matan, and John. I'm wondering if either of you feel like your pieces can exist independently of the collaboration.
Well, I'll just answer that quickly, because I made the work, the photographs were made originally just as an independent thing. And I am drawn to them. I think they hold up as individual pieces, but I also started researching gun violence as Robin did and responded to, and my work changes dramatically with Matan's music, and then also, as Mara mentioned, it was done as an exhibit with prints first, then it was done as a book, and then it was done as the film. And well, actually, we did it as a concert first with the images fading above the musicians playing, and maybe that worked in some ways the best because it didn't have the technical glitches that we keep having in the galleries. We need to get used to how to do this, but my images hold up to me as single images, but they transform dramatically in the film because they become more about the blending of the images together with the music, the audio, and the text and the timing in such a way that it's just totally different. So I've never done a piece before or worked on a piece with others that had more than one iteration, but this one really does for me. And I'm kind of amazed by how different the work is. If you get to see the film and hear the audio without a technical glitch compared to seeing the prints.
They are very different in feel, particularly the projected image. There's sort of a diaphanous quality that's a little bit ghostly because I'm used to your more saturated prints. But it's, I mean, they're very, very different. They feel very, very different. And I think that's a good thing because there is this sort of delicacy of spirit that fades away and the words come forward and then the music comes above it. But it's a very different feeling than having 22, 23 prints on the wall.
And Robin and Matan, do you imagine your words and your music existing independently?
In this case, I would say no. I've done a number of different kinds of collaborations with other sorts of artists in the past. And in some of those cases, I did feel like I wrote poems to go with abstract paintings and poems on top of music that were poems. But in this case, not at all. I felt that I had to saturate myself with the photographs and the music utterly in order to get anywhere. And that's what I wanted to do. I also felt, who am I to speak? You know, it didn't feel my solo project to do this work. I felt like it's our whole entire giant community has to respond to this, and our microcosm of that for me was our community of 3 people responding together to this thing. And I think that gave me some sense of permission, now that I look back on it, to do some things that also I wrote it much more of a kind of collage with lots of gaps in it compared to what I usually write. And that's because I was hearing and seeing in my mind everything else filling in between. So less than anything else I've ever written, it doesn't stand by itself. And I like that about it. I think, you know, when 2 people collaborate, it makes a 3rd thing. When 3 people collaborate, it makes at least a 4th or 5th or 6th thing that is its own thing. That's how I feel about it.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you, Robin. But I will say that where I diverge is probably that I think each of these elements work, and I think my feeling about it is that they just work differently on their own than they do as a combination. And there, of course, there are all sorts of manifestations of this work that are only or primarily 2 media, right? There's the book, which doesn't need the music. There's the concerts, which doesn't have the text. And each produces this kind of a real, you know, a literally unique experience that is similar but distinct from the others. And I really like that about the work. So I think partly it comes out of each of the pieces having some kind of integrity on them.
Mm-hmm. Right. I do feel, for example, the text goes in order from the beginning to the end. It's not just a sampling.
Yeah,
so I guess it has that kind of integrity. Right. Yeah.
And the music doesn't. The music can start at any point, designed that way. And as long as it moves to adjacent pieces, like the physical manifestation of photographs, it works for me. That's the idea, is that every performance of the pieces will have a different ordering or a different starting point.
Great. Danny?
Yeah, there's a question for Claire, and then and Colleen also has a question for John, and Amy has a question for Colleen. So how about we go in that order and then see where we are. So Claire, the question for you is someone asking, so did you create those individual collages with the intention of each one being its own work that you gave to the subject to the person who's depicted, or was it a unified work like we see in the gallery?
I think it's both. And I think, so the image of her is something that I took of her in 2011. So that image is old, but I think the collective part, what I asked the girls to do, I always call them girls, but they're not, they're ladies. They're grown women, is if they wanted to participate, they paid for the supplies. And I think then they got the piece as a part of the overall as the whole piece.
Right.
And so, but you had to then go get all of the individual pieces back from the owners in order to present them at our museum.
Yes. So Tracy and Aunt Linda, my godmother's childhood friend that also went to the high school, they are among those that I had to go. So Aunt Linda dropped hers off with all the other Goodman siblings, and Tracy, I forget. No, Tracy actually couldn't get hers because hers is at work and was locked up because of COVID. So you had a couple girls that had that process as well. But yes.
So she went and collected them all so that we could rehang them in the fashion that they've been originally displayed. And she was kind enough to drive up to deliver them all, and then she came back with her mommy and went through Vermont. So from Baltimore here.
I'll be back next weekend. So see you guys then.
So Amy, you have a question for Colleen, and then Colleen, you have a question for Colleen. We'll go like that. It'll be like that.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Well, I just wanted to say, Colleen, I absolutely love your commemoration of your mother and the way that you your process. I think process is really important for me, as you can see from my own video, and that idea of time and healing and grieving, and the way you sketched it. And so I guess my question really is to further explore that process, and to hear a little bit more about your action in your studio and how you, if you did this, daily, if it kind of was part of a meditation. I would just love to hear a little bit more about your process, because I think it's so beautiful.
Thank you so much. How can I respond to that? I think so. So one of the things I realized when I started doing this work, it was pretty much a daily practice, going to my studio. And I normally work, 8-hour days in my studio, but this immediately following my mother's death, for everybody here who has grieved a loved one, my energy was not at its usual level. So I would work for 3 or 4 hours at a time, and that was as much as I could do at the time. And I would work in a few of the drawings at once, and I would build them separately. Some of them would take 3-4 days, some of them took weeks, some of them even took months to fall into place. I did a lot of blind contour drawing, and that was very intentional on my part. I wasn't so concerned about what they looked like. I want to explore more how they felt. And so that was very freeing for me in that way. I also worked with a material process that wasn't subtractive, because I wanted the marks to stay and I wanted the marks to layer. Although I did hedge my bets a little later because some of them I did sand. They're all on museum board, a thick museum board. And I used some sandpaper in some of them to take some of them down and to make some of the marks more suggestive, not overstated. And I think it was very meditative. I think that's a very good word to use to describe it. And it was very much a process where I was totally immersed in the act of drawing. I really wasn't thinking about my mother at all consciously in that, in that time. Yeah, it was very meditative. So I don't know if that helps answer your question at all.
Yeah, thank you.
And Colleen, did you have a question for John?
Yeah, I was curious, John, when you mentioned you've shown the photographs separately before, I was just curious what size they were and if you had a particular sequence that you exhibited them in.
So the photographs are printed on a 24-inch roll paper, so they're probably, the image size is about 22 by 29 inches. And I made them think, there was 22 people who had passed away originally. And so first I selected 22 pictures and I made them thinking of a grid with a stack of 11 images on top of 11 images. And then we changed the sequence when it became a book and their pages were alternated single images against text. And then it changed again in the film.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really different work for me. I've never done work that where so much of what the work became was done after taking pictures, because the pictures were all made at this one time where, again, I didn't know the community, hadn't been there. I just landed there, thought I'd stay for a couple hours and kept returning for 4 days, but then spent a lot of months working with those images in different formats later. But I also want to commend you and Amy and others for doing work with grieving. I mean, I've shot a lot of images of my parents as they were in their last year of life, and I have them sitting ready to work on when I go back and dabble with them, but I have not been able to get myself to put it together yet. So I understand how challenging that experience is and how beautiful it is.
Yeah, I wrote a book about my father's death from Alzheimer's, an entire book about it called Horizon Note. And it just took years to write. And my sense was that I wasn't able to write about anything else. So I just had to keep writing about it until I was sort of done writing about it, and then some more later and some more and some more. Grief slows time down. It's like a mire of attention. Am I right? To me. Yeah.
I was just gonna say that the theme of time, like literally when I was up there, the amount of time that it took some of you, or most of you, all of you, and the amount of effort to create something that is big enough that it makes you feel the magnitude of something that's very intangible, I think is an interesting to parlay with flowers, and like kind of tying that in with what Mara's goals were, that flowers die quickly, right? And then they grow and they bloom, and some bloom multiple times. There's a lot of layers here. And I think the amount of time that you all have taken is very impressive. Thinking about your sculpture, Miles, as you were talking about, I was like, how actually do you carve granite? Literally, I was like, how actually do you do that? Do you have calluses? Which I'm sure you do. I'm sure we all have some kind of calluses. But yeah, I just want to make that note that I think the conversation around time, both immediate and then the physical action, and then the overall metaphorical one is not cool. Cool is not the right word, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Claire. There's a wonderful note here that from great artist and friend of many of us, and many of you will know Craig Stockwell, who's in the Zoom audience tonight, who says, thank you all, great to see you and get some thoughts on this very pleasing show. And I just want to add to that, that it's been our experience at the museum on a daily basis that people have really responded, audience has really responded so powerfully to this show. And it seems like many people have kind of like honed in on one body of work or another. Like we'll get some long, thoughtful comments in our visitor surveys or in our comment book, specifically about Claire's work or specifically about Colleen's or Miles or Amy's or whoever it is. And when the show is done, we'll gather all that up and share it with all of you. But the work has really moved people. And I think as a whole, as an exhibition, it's also had a really powerful effect. And so thank you, Mara.
You're welcome. I
Thank
think,
you.
well, first, because I expanded it to include the kinds of commemoration, memorialization, hope for the future, keeping faith during a very difficult time that isn't specifically related to a parent's death or this mass shooting, or the show became richer with the addition of the other two artists. But there's something about this show coming out of this pandemic when people can finally come in groups and talk in front of artwork again, that just the timing of the whole show added a layer of meaning for visitors that probably wouldn't have been there a year and a half ago when we were supposed to be doing this show. So art changes with the times.
And you know, speaking of that, as you mentioned, Mara, earlier, I want to, you know, echo what you said earlier. Encourage everyone who's out there listening and watching. If you happen to be in the Brattleboro area in the next almost 2 weeks, you know, before June 13th, then please come to the museum for an actual in-person art experience. We're open Wednesday through Sunday, 10 to 4. You can make a reservation on our website or just drop in, whichever you prefer. And admission is on a pay-as-you-wish basis. So June 13th, this show comes down, and then we change over, and less than a week later, we have all new exhibits opening. And so this feels like such a perfectly timed, you know, reflection on what we've just experienced. And the show that's about to come into the space a week after this show leaves is called Expedition. And the underlying theme is really about getting out and exploring new lands and new territories, you know, emotionally and physically and literally and figuratively. And so it just feels like exactly what should be happening next after this show. And so we're going to actually have an opening. I hope you'll all join us, a public opening, just like the similar format to the celebration we had for these shows a few weeks ago. We're doing that on Saturday, June 9th. Please come and celebrate with us. That's at 5 p.m. Mara, I just have a few other quick final announcements, unless you or anyone else has anything further to add.
I'm all set. I'm just sending a thank you to all my beautiful artists and panelists, because it's been an honor working with each of you individually and then seeing the show come together in such, I have to say, kind and generous way, because artists are always kind to the Brattleboro Museum and Art Center in loaning us work and bringing their work to us and from us. We do depend on the kindness of artists, but I think it's a kind, deep, thought-provoking body of work that comes together in a very special and a very rich way. And that's sort of the alchemy of how art speaks to itself, even when we're all standing out of the way of the visitor experience.
Well, I second that. I thank all of you. Thank you, Mara. I want to let you all know, and all of you out in the audience, that a recording of this discussion tonight will be available on our website within the next day or two. That's brattleboromuseum.org, and so you can then share it with anyone who wasn't able to watch tonight and who you think might be interested. While you're there on our website, you can, if you're so inclined, you can check out the recordings of other events that we've presented over this unusual year, dozens and dozens of online events and some really wonderful, fascinating conversations. Those are under the events part of our website, and then you click on the video archive. And the last thing I'd like to say is that if you enjoyed this event tonight and would like to make a donation to the Brattleboro Museum to support this type of free programming, we would always be very grateful for that. That's something you can do on our website as well, brattleboromuseum.org. I think that does it. Thank you all one more time. And please stay safe and take good care of yourselves and each other, and really hope to see you all in person soon. Good night.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you.
I appreciate being in this. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.